Hey guys, my name is Anthony and in today's video I'm going to be talking over TSRL round 12 at Silverstone. So this is my home race and this is the second race of the week that I did. The first race that I did, I'm not really going to make a video on that because honestly not much happened after I got wing damage. But if you really do want to see that, I will make a video on that race. Again, nothing really happened after I got wing damage. I did make some overtakes and stuff and I did end up in a decent position considering. But at the same time, nothing happened that I can really talk about and really give you guys some decent tips about. So coming up to the first lap that we did in quali now, and we're coming up to Stowe, and this was a pretty good banker lap. I actually felt really nice going through this lap. Usually when I do banker laps, it feels kind of bad. Even if I've been practicing for the past couple of hours, I still feel as if my banker laps are something that can be improved. But for this track, for Silverstone, this lap felt really good and we went on pole with a 24.4. And then moving on to our final lap now, you can see we're in third place at the start of the lap. So coming up to turn 1 in 8th gear, just before the 50 meter board, turn in completely flat out, and turn 2 is also flat out. And coming up to turn 3, right when the curve starts, that's when you want to break down into third, and then for this corner, break down into first. You can use second or third, it's up to you, but I tend to go into first when I'm on the Xbox, and I use, I think, third gear when I'm on the PC. It's just personal preference really. And then coming up to this corner just before the 50 meter board, brake in, turn, and 4th gear, try and ride over that curve. And then for Luffields, it's a really long right-hander. It feels as if it never ends, but as it's coming up to the end, you really want to try and get the power down as soon as you can. And then coming up to old turn 1 now, just before the 50 meter board, turn in, this corner is completely flat out on the F1 2020 game, and it feels really nice going through that flat out. Then Maggots and Beckett's, which is probably my worst sequence on corners on the track. I actually take it pretty nicely. In 5th gear, you can use 6th gear. I think it's a little bit quicker if you can get 6th gear and really get the grip around that corner going through Chapel. But yeah, we take it pretty nicely, and I think we've done a 1 minute 1.2 in the middle sector. So we're up on our time by about half a tenth, I believe. I can't really see the time, but taking this corner now, we put a lot more minimum speed into that corner, and we end up gaining almost 2 tenths as we cross the line to go into P2, and that time was actually 1,000th of a second slower than my overall PB around here. So I was very happy with that lap because that was basically a PB type of lap there. So moving on to the race strategy, we're going from softs to mediums, and we're using, I think, roughly about 2.2 laps of extra fuel. So as we've got 5 red lights, and away we go. And I wanted to try and get into first place as soon as possible, as you do when you're in second place. But sadly, we was on the sort of dirtier side of the track, so we didn't get as great as a start as Dazed, who got a pretty decent start, as Josu behind us tries to overtake us going into turn 3, and I was having none of it. I wanted to stay in second place because I had done a little bit of practice with Dazed before this race, and Dazed I knew was the type of person who liked to use his ERS as quickly as possible and try to get out of your DRS before lap 3, very similar to the Syra approach if you've watched some of V-Syra's races. And my goal was to really just stick within the DRS of Dazed without using as much ERS myself. So it really came down to how I used my fuel and how I just went around the track. If I was really able to make up time in places where you didn't really need to use as much ERS, so that when Dazed did decide to use ERS, like during the main straight, like the straights we're coming up to right now, then I didn't really have to use as much to really stay in that DRS. And if you look behind us, Joseph has actually overtaken Josu, and he is about 7 tenths back. So right now, if I can stay within Dazed's DRS, we would be able to get outside of the DRS of everyone behind us, which is exactly what I was looking for, so that we can really make this race a sort of 2-horse race between me and Dazed. So as we come up to the first lap now, he obviously is going to get the fastest lap as he was leading the race going through the first lap, and then we move on to the end of lap 2, beginning of lap 3, and this is when DRS is enabled. And as you can see, by that time I just didn't use as much ERS as I probably should, and now we're stuck in no man's land, or as I like to call it, Verstappen land, where basically we're outside of the DRS of the guys behind us, but we're also out of DRS for the guy ahead of us. So basically we've just got to really try and use as much ERS and use as much fuel as we can to get back into the DRS of Days, but sadly we just didn't have the pace compared to him. Not sure if it was to do with the fact that our setup was maybe not as good in the race as his, or if he just had general better raw pace around this track than I did, as we get a penalty which actually comes to bite us in the arse later on in the race. But yeah, I think he just had general raw pace compared to us, because he was so quick compared to what we were doing, and we just couldn't keep up with him, and we ended up getting a penalty due to us really trying to push to get back inside of that DRS. And as you can see, we're basically about 2.2 seconds behind Days, but then we're about 2.5 seconds ahead of Josu, so we're really stuck in that position where we can't really get DRS from the guy ahead of us, but at the same time we're not having to worry about the guys behind us because of how far back they are. So what I decided to try and do is, at the end of lap 9, I decided to try and go into the pits to really go for that undercut, because I believe the undercut is pretty decent around here. So I thought if I pit now, then I can really go for the undercut if I can get in clean air. And as we skip towards the end of the pit lane now, we actually end up almost doing a Grosjean, and we almost end up crashing out of the pit lane. So that, literally my heart at that point dropped down into my stomach, but luckily I managed to save it and didn't cause myself any wing damage. So now is the time when we really need to focus on pushing. Now that we're doing our outlap, we really need to try and have the best outlap possible so that we can make the undercut work on Dazed. And as we move on to the next lap, sadly that didn't really work out, and Dazed actually got the overcut over us. So it wasn't the best in lap, and it wasn't the best out lap either, clearly, because he managed to get the overcut on us, which is not good for our situation, because then we're now going to have to really try and get into his DRS and then really make that overtake once we get closer to him. So moving on to lap 12 now. I think this is the fastest lap that we do in the race, or it's at least the fastest lap that we do at the time, and I wanted to sort of talk over it because it was a pretty nice lap, and if we had continued to drive like this, I think we could have actually caught up to him a lot sooner than we probably could have. As you can see, that first sector was really nice. We really felt the grip of the car, and honestly, this was probably the best I felt during the entire race. As you can see, we take that left-hander really nicely, and then coming up to Luffields now, we stay tight towards the curb on the inside there, and again, I just felt really nice going through this lap. And though I felt very confident and I felt as if I was driving good throughout the race, this particular lap, if I had the consistency to really put in these type of laps each and every single lap, then I definitely feel that we could have kept within the DRS of Days during that first stint. As you can see, we take Maggots and Beckett's really nicely, and Maggots and Beckett's are corners that I really struggle at compared to all the other corners around the track. It's definitely my least favorite corner, my least favorite sequence of corners going through this track, even though for most people it's probably their favorite. So as we come up to the final corner now, we're carrying a lot of minimum speed going into these corners, and I think that's why we felt so quick in the second stint, because on the medium tyres I was able to carry a lot more minimum speed into corners, which obviously allowed me to go quicker. And we finally managed to catch up 2 days around about, I believe, lap 18, but it wasn't until lap 20 that we really were close enough to make the overtake. But as you can see, we've not really got a lot of fuel and a lot of ERS to play with, so I probably should have stayed behind him for a little bit, save some ERS, save some fuel, so that I can really make the push to try and get outside of his DRS once we had made the overtake. So now that we're past him, we've now got to try and get outside of his DRS, because as you can see, everyone in the top 5 has at least 3-second time penalties, except the one person that I really need to have a 3-second time penalty, which is Dazed. And during the interview through this phase of the race, Dazed was saying that he was pretty much just staying inside of my DRS as best as he could and saving up the fuel and ERS he needed to really make the push on the final couple of laps. Whilst me, I was using all of my fuel and all of the remaining ERS that I had to try and get outside of his DRS, so I can try and get outside of that 3-second time penalty that I had, so that I could actually win this race. And on lap 24, you can see we're about 6 tenths away from him, so we're not really able to get outside of that DRS. And moving on to the final lap now through Meggetts and Beckett's, you can see we're only 4 tenths ahead of him, and we're not going to win this race basically because of the time penalty that we had. And going through Meggetts and Beckett's, actually it turns out that if Dazed had went just a millimeter to the left or right, I can't remember which corner he almost got the warning going through, he would have got a warning and we would have actually won this race, because I decided to fight the position just so that I could finish on in first place on track. And if he had gotten that warning going through Meggetts and Beckett's on the final lap, we would have won this race. But sadly, because of the penalty that we got, I believe on lap 6, we ended up coming second. So that is the third second place in a row that we've had in TSRL, and it's very good for the championship, don't get me wrong. It's just I really want to get that first race win, because I've never had a league racing win before. So I'm going to end the video off here. If you did enjoy this video, make sure to hit the like button and stick around by subscribing to the channel. Also, make sure to follow me on Twitter and join my Discord server. Both links will be in the description, and I'll see you guys in my next video.